This is the Roots and All Budcast, presented by Sarah Wilson.
Hello, and welcome to this week's podcast, which I'm recording from the University of Essex, where I'm attending the Beth Chatto Symposium, which has an excellent lineup of speakers from the world of gardening, and I'm sure I'll report back to you about it in the next podcast. This has been a really exciting week for me for gardening-wise, because I went to visit somebody who has a specialist nursery, and I'm going to be bringing the results of that to you very shortly. But we also managed to get some video footage, which I'm hoping to upload to our YouTube channel. And I've also got some exciting news about an overseas trip, which I've got lined up. But anyway, cracking on with this podcast. Although we're now into September, I'm going to be reflecting back on the month of August and why it's a tricky one for some. And I'm also going to talk about my houseplant enemy number one for 2018. So it came to my attention this week, there's a phenomenon I can only refer to as the August meh, and I call it that because that's how multiple gardeners responded when I asked how they felt about their gardens at this time of year. The question arose when I took to social media to ask for suggestions of what to cover in the podcast and the blog. And one person asked, how do you keep motivated in your garden at this time of year when you know it's kind of just an inevitable downward slope into winter from here on out? And I have to admit, I was surprised because I've never had a problem with August myself. Sure, it's a bit quiet on the gardening front. The weeds are behaving quite well. There's not too much to do in the way of pruning. The veg patch is looking a bit fatigued. And as I mentioned in the last podcast, I definitely felt the absence of the roses over the past month. So I took to social media to canvass opinions as to how you can stay motivated in this relatively low-key month. And I was even more surprised to find that I'm the odd one out. Loads of people find August meh. So why is it that people lose their gardening oomph at this time of year? For some, it's the weather. For others, it seems to be an instinctual winding down. And for one person who responded, it's a temporary blip. And she says August is, quote, blousy, bit faded, nothing fresh. The light on the garden is often just wrong. Then September, new colours, new light, new ideas. So I asked opinions because as an August non-hater, I felt a fraud giving advice on how to avoid the August doldrums. And I got some really good advice, which I reckon can be split into two camps, which actually dovetail quite nicely together. So firstly, just crack on. If you feel there are things that need to be done, pull your boots on and get out and do them. You don't even need to enjoy the work. Sometimes it's just doing it that is enough. And the other advice falls into the camp of just doing enough to keep you ticking over until you feel your enthusiasm coming back. So do things that can give you immediate gratification. Take a trip to a nursery and buy something that's looking good now and plant it out. If that's a perennial, it will come up next August, which is when you need another lift. So thank you for that, Tanya. My trick is to plant up a container or two or three. That's what I do in my garden with fresh plants that are in flower. And even if they only look good for a few weeks, it'll be enough to lift your spirits. Also concentrate on the bits of your garden you can see from your windows so you don't get fed up every time you glance out. Even one plant that looks fresh or is flowering can provide a focal point that makes all the tatty stuff disappear into the background. And the other great distractions at this time of year are the bulb and seed catalogues. And as I said in the last podcast, now's the time to get your bulb order in and also your seed order. And if you really can't bear to go out and sort through your garden, sit indoors and look through all the plant porn in the catalogues and dream about the possibilities that next year holds. That's the next best thing. So all this August bashing got me thinking, why don't I have the August blues? And I know I've been a bit less enamoured of my garden than usual this year, but that's been the extremely hot summer that's given it a bit of a pounding. But I think the answer is that most of the gardens I've worked in subscribe in some way or another to the new perennial style of planting. And the new perennial movement, as it's called, is a style of planting synonymous with a designer called Pete Udolph. It mimics natural planting you might find in a prairie or a stylised meadow. And you may have seen an example of his work if you went to the RHS Hampton Court Flower Show this year, where he created a meadow-style display. You can also see his signature style in the planting of the High Line, which is a public space in New York. And if you haven't seen it, I recommend go online and find some pictures of it, if you can't hop over to New York for the weekend, obviously. The reason the new perennial style works in August is because this is when many of its key plants really get going. Have a look at the Twitter feed of Sussex Prairies to see just how much their garden starts to take off throughout August to almost breathtaking degrees. And the other type of plant used very much in this style of gardening are the grasses, which again are absolutely in full swing throughout August, and they give life and movement to the garden when everything else is looking a bit conked out. Personally, my August is made bearable in my garden by the following plants. I've got dahlias. Lythrum has been looking really good, and that's flowered non-stop for months. The Japanese anemones come out this time of year. Good old Verbena bonariensis, rudbeckias, echinaceas, heleniums, salvias and sanguisorbas are all good performers for me in my garden at this time of year. In episode 7 of the main podcast, which is out on the 18th of September, I talked to Peter Thurman, who's an incredible plant expert. And one of the many wise things that Peter says is don't beat yourself up if your borders don't look good all year round. If you go for impact in a bed in May and June, it can be difficult and labour intensive to have it still looking good through to August. So sometimes you just have to face the fact that there'll be downtimes in your garden and use these to take some time out from working in it. And if you really can't bear to deal with your outdoor greenery, or as in many cases it is yellow at the moment, you can always concentrate on your indoor plants instead, which, if they're anything like mine, are riddled with thrips. Jason Stevens mentioned thrips in episode 6 of the podcast, but they're not something I've had a problem with until this year, when suddenly they're appearing everywhere, not just on my plants, but on clients' plants in their homes as well. I've said it before on the blog, and I'm going to say it again and again, as much to remind myself as anyone else, but check the undersides of the leaves on your houseplants every few days. In the blink of an eye, pests can appear. They can multiply and damage your plants, and the only way to prevent damage is to spot the little toe rags and get rid of them before any damage is done, which is exactly what I didn't do with the thrips that appeared on my own Alocasia stingray. And I should have been better prepared, because Alocasias are magnets for horrible sucking pests. But before I knew it, the leaves had taken on a slightly sickly, pale look, and on closer inspection, I spotted thrip larvae on the underside of the leaves. So thrips themselves are longish, skinny, black insects that are very small, and the larvae are the same shape, but even smaller and yellow. And they suck the sap from the plant, causing the leaves to have that yellow or white, faintly stippled look. As you may already have guessed, I don't like killing anything, but I had to wipe the thrips off my plant with some wet cotton wool, and I had to do this a couple of times before the thrips disappeared. At which point I got sick of looking at the damaged leaves, and I chucked the Alocasia outside and swapped it for a lovely fern, which I had waiting patiently for its moment of glory on my bathroom cabinet. And I haven't checked it, but I suspect the Alocasia is now thrip-free and happy as Larry. So if anyone knows why 2018 has been the year of the thrip, please let me know. So thank you for listening. I can now say that the amount of times the podcast has been downloaded is into the thousands, which is brilliant and a bit scary. So thank you. But I can't let you go without nagging you a little bit, can I? So out of the thousands of times people have listened, only 13 of you lovely people have rated and reviewed the podcast in iTunes. So please, if you can, I know it's not the easiest thing to do actually, but if you get a chance, please rate and review the show so that other people get to know that I'm here. And don't forget, I'm always up for suggestions for future episodes and potential guests. So check me out on Twitter, where I'm Roots and All, Facebook, where I'm Roots and All UK, and Instagram, where I'm Roots and All Pod. And don't forget, you can always email me podcast@rootsandall.co.uk. So have a great week, and I will catch you next Tuesday.
For more information, visit the Roots and All website at rootsandall.co.uk. To download more episodes, visit iTunes, your favourite podcast provider, or get them direct from our website.